Okay, good. Let me start off just by congratulating Nick Stern, if he's here, and the team. Shifting business as usual is a hard task, but I think he succeeded in shifting business as usual in many, many dimensions. So congratulations, and it's an honour to be here. I was chief economist in DFID. It was 10 years ago, I guess. I think you seconded some of our economists, and various drafts of this document came backwards and forwards, which is not to claim that we made any useful contributions, but anyway, congratulations, Nick. Okay, I want to talk about cities, really focus on cities. Now, evidently cities need to deliver a lot of things. I'm summarizing them as two sort of headings here. Cities need to be functional. Now, functional is not a word I like very much, but I guess I'm using it to mean, well, they better be productive. They better create jobs and high productivity jobs. They're places where people work and have to derive an income. And they better be livable. Places where people live as well as work, so they've got to deliver amenity and a decent standard. So that's what I mean by functional, and obviously we want them to be sustainable, low carbon, green, whatever language we're going to use. They're the two objectives, and as we look around, I guess, well, I'd like to say some cities delivered both, but maybe I better put that in the future tense. Some will deliver both, we hope. Some deliver one of those things, and quite a lot don't deliver either. And it's really the cities that don't deliver either is what the cities that I want to focus on in this talk. And obviously there the task, the objective is to develop the trajectory for cities to be able to move in both those directions of being more functionable and low carbon. And the argument I want to make is that to do that, we really have to start thinking about cities as a whole. We have to see the relationship between all the parts of the cities. Cities are complex units. They're residential, they're workplaces. Think of the city as a sort of giant factory on the one hand, and also a place for living. So the components are residential activity, residential capital, huge amounts of residential capital. Whatever, I forget the numbers, 2/3 of the wealth in the total wealth in the UK is sunk in residential capital, some number like that. Their business capital, their infrastructure and public capital. We have to see all those bits together if we're going to move trajectories from the very unsatisfactory trajectories that some cities are on to a trajectory that can meet both those targets. Okay, when we think about cities, I suppose we can think in two contexts. One is existing urban areas in relatively high middle-income countries that are a good part of the way through the urbanisation process. We can think about those. Or we can think about developing urban areas, new urban areas in the developing world. I'm going to concentrate pretty much exclusively on the second of those, new urban areas, developing economies. I think there's a compelling case for doing that, and let me make a number of arguments why that's so. First, of course, there's as new urban areas develop, there is the risk of lock-in to unsatisfactory structures. And by lock-in there, I actually mean two different things. One is the sunk capital argument. You've built the wrong sort of infrastructure, wrong sort of houses. So lock-in in that sense is obviously important. But I want to use lock-in in a slightly richer sense in addition to that. I want to argue that those sort of trajectories, the potential for bad trajectories, there really is a potential for getting locked into low-level equilibria where cities are really delivering neither of those objectives. And it's that we really need to think about. So it's lock-in both in the capital stock and just in a whole situation where you're not creating jobs or income or houses, and things are really going badly. So I'm going to concentrate on developing countries, new cities, partly for that reason, partly because the imperative of functionality is urgent, right? Some of these cities are horrible places to live. We've got to move on it. And third, of course, for scale. Now, we've already talked a bit in the previous sessions about the scale of the urbanization challenge in developing countries. But let me reinforce that quickly. I mean, my focus here is going to be very much on Africa. And the numbers there, I mean, they're in the charts or just in words. The numbers there are the African urban population trebling over the next 30, 40 years, something like that. That's something over 500 million people, maybe 500 million up to 700 million people. So if you start scaling that, it's truly enormous. I mean, the urban population of the whole of Europe and North America isn't much more than that right now. Okay, so Africa is going to have to build, over the next 30, 40 years, Africa is going to have to build twice as much urban structure as it's built in the whole of past history, and almost as much urban structure as the whole of Europe and North America together over the last couple of thousand years. Okay, so the challenge there is absolutely enormous. So getting the scale of that, these are facts that have been mentioned earlier, but they're facts that are worth repeating many, many times, just the scale of that challenge. And of course, I mean, I am going to focus on Africa, not Asia, but you can see from the orange bars another challenge. But my focus is going to be on Africa. Let me quickly make apologies for talking about Africa as a whole throughout this talk, particularly to the next speaker. Africa is, of course, a heterogeneous continent of many countries and many cities, but I'm going to refer to it as a whole. Okay, a few more sort of preliminaries. The first two bullets here are kind of obvious, and I hope we all completely agree on them, but I'm going to state them again anyway. Yeah, urbanization goes with development. Don't think of stopping urbanization, slowing it down as any sort of strategy whatsoever. The two go together. There's two-way causality. The plot on the right is the log of per capita income on the horizontal and urban share on the vertical. And that relationship between the two has always been there, always will be there. So, urbanization goes with development, full stop, at this point. Yeah. Second sort of preliminary thing that I hope we all agree with, urbanization is well, put it differently. Cities are good things. They're where innovation takes place, productivity is high, social interaction, and potentially green. So I'm going to assert there cities are good things. If you don't believe me, read Ed Glazer's book, where the title gives away the argument, right? So it's the Triumph of the City, a marvelous book by Ed Glazer. Okay, but getting to what I actually want to talk about. The challenge for developing cities, particularly in Africa. Africa is urbanizing early at low income levels. So this chart, you've got income here, urbanization there, some regression line, Korea, all countries, China, Vietnam. But Nigeria heading sort of straight up, urbanizing with little income growth. Côte d'Ivoire, the yellow line. Tanzania, one of them, the other yellow line, the orangey yellow line. Okay, so Africa is urbanizing early. That's problematic. Second, it's not going well. African urbanization is, I'm going to talk about this in more detail, is I think dysfunctional in many respects. It's failing to deliver the productivity or livability. And the argument I want to make is that there's this risk of Africa getting locked into a path of relatively low density, high emission, dysfunctional development. So we need to see cities as a whole to think about that path and to think about how to shift it to a path that can deliver, hopefully, both objectives. Okay, how am I going to do this? Well, first I'm going to talk about functional cities, then African cities, then policies. Functional cities is going to be a little bit of a sort of urban economics 101, I'm afraid, but very, very short. And I should have said at the beginning that I'm sort of an economist with an interest in geography and urban stuff. I don't think that makes me touchy-feely, or doesn't make me Tony Travers either, to look at Dimitri sitting down there. So yeah, what I want to get over is to get people thinking about cities as a whole, rather than just sort of piecemeal a bit of climate policy on top. That's what I want to try and get over on this. So functional cities, then African cities, then policies. Okay, 3 facts on functional cities. Cities that work. What do we know about them? So this is not Africa, right? This is the background. Fact 1, cities are high productivity places. Okay. There's some elasticity of productivity with respect to size there, but basically each sort of doubling of city size, as you look in the cross-section of cities, raises productivity by 3 or 4 or 5%. So when you go from small cities to very large ones, that's an awful lot of doubling, so 30, 40, 50% higher productivity. That's a very robust piece of research evidence. It comes from, the units of observation can be regions, cities, firms, individuals, controlling for everything you like. Very, very robust. Mainly the evidence drawn from developed countries, but work on China and India suggests those productivity benefits of cities are even larger in those countries. Possibly not in Africa, because they haven't got the sectors that delivers the productivity, but China and India, possibly larger. So fact 1, cities are high productivity, and the reason, of course, is it's kind of Adam Smith. It's scale and specialization, right? If you've got a lot of people together, connected, density, then it becomes worth my while specializing in something very, really acquiring deep skills, deep knowledge in something, because I know there'll be a market because the city's large enough to sustain it. So lots of agglomeration type benefits there. So fact 1, functional cities are high productivity. Fact 2, cities are capital intensive in residential, business, and of course, in infrastructure. Infrastructure, key role, as has already been said. It's not the sexiest word. You say you're interested in infrastructure, and it doesn't excite people, but absolutely key here. The 2 sort of particularly urban aspects of infrastructure, I guess, are you need infrastructure to mitigate the downsides of human proximity, right? Too many people in one place gets dangerous unless you have water and sanitation and everything. So you surely need infrastructure for that. And you need it to promote connectivity, and obviously that feeds back into the productivity argument. Cities that you can't move around aren't delivering the basic reason of why a city is there. One other point, and this is Urban Economics 101. Infrastructure can be self-financing in a city. Okay. I've said there's this huge productivity benefit of cities, but the main people who capture that productivity benefit are the people who happen to own the land in the cities, right? It's not necessarily the workers, it's the landowners. So land taxation is a source that can fund the enormous infrastructure needs of cities. Now, of course, there are timing problems. The land value appreciates after you've built the infrastructure, so borrowing finance is really important as part of that process. But what did that say? Right, okay. Fact 3, cities have efficient land use. Functional cities have efficient land use. The textbook one is the monocentric city. Okay, productive activities cluster in the center. Not all of them, but enormous forces for sectoral clustering. So here, the bottom thing is jobs per square kilometre. London, 140,000 in the centre, New York, 150,000. Jobs cluster, right? That's efficient land use. residential activity spreads out with gradients. So the top thing is residential density. So the idea of the monocentric city is really, it's a textbook idea, but it's there in the data, right? So this clustering force. But the point is that is efficient land use, okay? Things that want to cluster together do. So when people talk about mixed-use cities and mixed-use areas, I get a little bit nervous. To deliver productivity, you need 140,000 people working in a square kilometre. Climate implications, I'm not going to summarize all the evidence on climate efficiency of cities, but an obvious couple of comments. Density economizes on space and travel, but employment clustering does require commuting, right? There's travel there. And of course, the road of transport technology varies across cities, and you've already seen the classic comparison of Atlanta and Barcelona. Okay, Africa. Let me speed up and move to Africa. And again, what's going wrong? I want to argue that these cities are problematic, they're dysfunctional, they're stuck on potentially in a bit of a low-level trap, bad trajectory, bad for functionality and climate, and we've got to have policies to shift them out of it. So again, three points, three facts and a bit of argument. Okay, the housing side, the residential side. 60% of the African urban population live in slums. Failure to build formal structures. Most of these slums are single-story shacks. There's sprawl. So when you look at new developments, it's leapfrogging. It's spreading out in the country. A horrible sprawl going on. And land use is not efficient. There's a hodgepodge of use. You've got, close to the city centre, you've got slums coexisting with high value. So it's sprawling, it's inefficient, it's not dense. This is a good picture, although I know it's, the whole point, in a sense, the whole point is you can't really see any features there. It's an area outside Luanda, which is typical of the edges of quite a lot of African cities. So it's basically a dusty plain with lots of tin roofs scattered around. I mean, you maybe see a bit of a road up through the middle, a dirt road through the middle, but it's just single story, it's sprawl. I can barely see it from here, so I hope you've been able to see it slightly better than that. But anyway, the point is it's just scatter on a featureless plain. Okay, why? So, fact one on Africa, housing and land use pattern. Partly to do with land tenure. You're not going to build formal structures unless you'll have security in the land that you claim on land, and a lot of land claims are being competed. Partly inappropriate regulations and policy, building standards that are set too high, so they're ignored. And a bit of a lesson here for climate, right? I mean, if you set the standards too high, they're going to be ignored, and you're going to have that, right? Lack of mortgage finance, low incomes, and low expectations, right? We want to have building formal structures, dense cities, but if you've got low income, no expectations, all that stuff, it's not going to happen. And of course, the consequence is low livability, low connectivity, bad for emissions, bad for economic performance, low connectivity. African cities too. Infrastructure. Terrible shortage of infrastructure. Summarized here, I mean, shortage in absolute amounts, but lagging, not leading, which I think is an important point. If you think about a fast-growing city, then local public goods are important. By local public goods, I mean, in quite a small area, the street layout, maybe lighting, sanitation, water. So the local public goods are important. And then also the city-wide services, transport network and things. They're lacking horribly in many cities. Reasons, the funding challenge is critical. There's a World Bank study that puts the infrastructure, or put the cost of filling the infrastructure gap in developing cities at around 15–20% of urban GDP per year over 30 years. So that's a huge number, right? So you would need to increase investment by that share of GDP for decades to fill the gap. That either means getting savings rates, that's additional. That either means getting saving rates up to Chinese levels, which isn't going to happen, or massive international transfer of funds, international financial flows to finance that. And of course, weak governance doesn't help. But again, the consequence is well, if you're not laying out the street plans and things, it's all contributing to informal housing, sprawl, low connectivity, transport emissions, and all that. African cities, 3. Production and productivity. That's that third block, right? Residential infrastructure production. Lack of formal sector employment. Almost total absence of the sort of manufacturing exports that we think can drive economic growth in developing countries. The sectors that give the increasing returns, the productivity stuff, are simply absent from these cities. And of course, what are the causes? Well, there's general poor investment climate at the national, the macro level, but also the city is a problem. Low connectivity. Can you get the workers in if they're living way out? Low connectivity to workers, supplier markets, difficulty in assembling packages of land in many cities. And interesting, African cities have got high nominal wages. They've got low real wages, but at nominal exchange rates, they're very high cost places, right? I mean, essentially workers are requiring some compensation for the horrible living standards and difficulty of moving around and so on. So actually high nominal wage places. So of course, the story, this rather bleak story I'm painting here, is of sort of feedbacks, interactions between these things, a trajectory where these elements are fitting together into a bit of a low-level trap. So if you don't have the production side, you don't have jobs, income, you have low expectations, you don't have the tax base. If you don't have the tax base, you don't have infrastructure. If you don't have the income, you don't have housing. And we've seen the consequences of that and so on. So that low-level equilibrium. Okay, so I've painted a story of these, the functional city, the dysfunctional city. The argument, of course, is that we've got to shift the whole trajectory to one that is more functional and more climate. I should try and bring this talk back to climate at some point. More climate friendly, and that requires both, right? It's both objectives being hit with the same thing. Let me run through policies, and I think they're going to drop out in a fairly obvious way from what I've been saying so far. On the residential side, you require private investment, massive private investment. It's going to be the private sector that essentially builds the hundreds of millions of units of housing that are required. So a lot of that is just removing obstacles. Well, these are necessary, not sufficient conditions. Let me not imply that it's easy. Part of it is, clarity in land rights, making mortgage finance available. Building regulations, I've already said, don't make them too tight. The problem is they're too tight, so they're ignored. You want them to encourage people to build formal structures inside the regulations and affordable. And if you set the regulations too high, they'll just be ignored. Recognizing the value of density. Okay? Now, density will follow from efficient land use and the monocentric city and all that. But recognizing the value of density is really important. And what I put here is my favorite slide of the sort of catlet or whatever on the sort of top left. And different approaches. These are all projects that were publicly initiated, but basically private sector housing. The top one, top row is Angola. The middle row, the first one is South Africa, second one's Tanzania, and then the bottom Addis, as it says. And they're different models that are being pursued. And I think we can immediately see problems with at least 2 of those models. The Angolan city, built by the Chinese, is about 30 kilometers outside Luanda. It's far too expensive. No one could afford to live there. Obviously, it's now subsidized. I believe the commute into Luanda is about 3 hours, so it's just occupied by civil servants who have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, get home at 11 o'clock at night. Just horrible. So it looks high density, great, but it's too expensive in the wrong place. The middle row, it's quite expensive as well. And the problem there, I think, is evident. I mean, South Africa has done a fantastic job in building a lot of houses, but I think there is now debate that it's built the wrong sort of houses in the wrong place. I mean, a lot of these settlements are way out on the edges of on the edges of towns, so you're not getting the density, connectivity. You're not, again, the story of getting all bits of the city working together if you want stuff to work. The Tanzania one here, this is quite a small development that we were taken to. It was opened by the president very proudly, way out. They're expensive bungalows. I mean, you know, the idea that you're going to accommodate 500 million people in cities in housing of this type just is not on, right? The Addis story, I think I would argue, is a much more satisfactory way to go. The 5-story condominium or tenement block. You know, 5 stories, so you don't need a lift. Commercial activity possibly on the bottom. So you're getting density and affordability and livability. But these are all, you know, the debate needs to settle on which of these is the more appropriate model for many African cities. The Addis story isn't perfect. Some of these are being built, you know, way out on the edge of the city, but many more of them, you know, close to jobs, close to transport networks, achieving the density that is needed for productivity and climate. Okay, last slide. I was going down a policy list, I think. What was the first one? Something about residential. Density. Infrastructure, yeah, leading, not lagging. Transport systems that facilitate, you know, urban growth. These cities are going to expand, but not in a sprawling way. An important role, and why this sort of emphasis on leading, not lagging. As a city grows, you know, private investment is going to take place, but you know, where does it take place? Here, there, or nowhere, because it doesn't know which area is about to take off. Well, you can have a city plan that says it's all going to take off here, but African city plans tend not to be very credible. If you sink some infrastructure investment, that's a coordinating mechanism. It's a credible signal that this place is going to boom. So again, it's another way of stimulating the private investment that you need. Business, lowering costs to enable job creation, ability to assemble land, ability to cluster. You know, back to this point, you know, mixed use makes me nervous, right? Firms productive by clustering together and having people commute into them, then so be it. And the bottom line, of course, final point here has to be governance and finance. The revenue base, fundamentally important. Without that, you know, cities are going to be challenged. And of course, an authorizing environment where you know, the city can plan and do infrastructure and, you know, have a vision of how it's going to grow. Lots of African cities are in a situation where governance is split functionally and spatially. I mean, Dar es Salaam has 3 mayors for different different areas. As the city has grown, it hasn't reorganized its governance. So cities actually need that authorizing environment with clear lines of authority and leadership in the city. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony. That was, I think I can only describe that as sobering and a touch inspiring, subject to quite a number of challenges. Okay. We are a little short of time, so we're going to do just one quick round of 3 questions. Please keep it short. Tell me who you are. No statements. Let's keep it at questions. We've got a lady over there, another in the sort of second row here, and at the back, a gentleman with his hands up just there. And we'll collect the 3, and then if you want to pull them and answer them.
Hi, my name is Angela Pachon, and my question is about urban densities. You obviously showed how important and how could be for a strategy for more clean cities. But when in developing world where cities have already reached a high level of density, is this still a viable option to achieve a more clean city?
My name is Malvina Bondi. My question relates to policy. How well do you think that the targets laid out by the new urban agenda at Habitat Free support the building of low carbon and functional cities?
And
Okay, David Howlett from DFID. We worked a while back, Tony. I sort of lead on agriculture and sort of climate, so it's a rural question. But basically, it's the footprint, the links to water, food, and agriculture. You didn't mention anything outside the cities.
Okay, 3 great questions: urban density, low carbon policy, and I guess you could call it push factors into cities.
Yeah, the density point. Yeah, I think it's really important to. I'm hesitating what language to use here. I mean, okay, some people draw the distinction between being density and crowdedness, right? Yeah, I mean, clearly, city centre slum areas are dense. I mean, statistically, a lot of people live there. They're dense in people, but they're not dense in capital, right? If you've got density of population in single-story buildings, then it's enormously crowded, and that brings some of the economic advantages of density and an awful lot of unlivability because of the crowdedness. So what you need is to get the environment where people can want to invest in formal structures. Investment in formal structure. You resolve the density crowded tension by building up, basically. But that requires formal, not informal settlement, and to sink capital in formal buildings, you've got to have land rights and some finance and capital markets and all that. So, yeah, I'm not saying push density by getting more people in shacks living close to the centre, but I am saying crowd the capital as well as the people, and there's scope for having both. The new urban agenda. Yeah, no, as far as, that does make some good sound comments about the necessity of economic performance and productivity and the role of density in achieving that. Like so many of these documents, it suffers from prioritising absolutely everything and therefore prioritising nothing. So perhaps let me leave it at that. Agriculture outside the city, clearly there are sort of pull and push factors into the city, and in Africa, I think a lot of them have been push factors. Low agricultural productivity, low incomes in agriculture. Clearly there's a symbiotic relationship between areas, but I'm not quite sure what the question was. I mean, cities will grow, will continue to grow. It's going to happen. As it does so, the effects on neighbouring rural areas will, I think, be positive, not negative. What was good? Was that? That's a few remarks on agriculture. I'm not sure whether it's answered any specific question. Sorry? Yeah.
That's a scope. Question.
Yeah. There is a list of possible other issues. Yeah, these cities will grow. They will have to get water supply, and this is one of the many infrastructure challenges.